I posted a video that was viewed over 6,000 times. Unlike all my other videos that have been viewed over 99,000 times, it stated that there was no evidence that any God exists, and invited theists to prove me wrong by providing their evidence that any God existed. Of course, I got no such thing from the theists, but here's what I did get.
One, what is the evidence for the existence of God? And two, what is the evidence against the existence of God? Now, with respect to that second question, I'll leave it up to Dr. Atkins to present the evidence against God's existence.
And this brings us to the 11th lie the Christians tell and why they tell it, that there's no evidence either way. When Christians say that there's no evidence either way, they're admitting that they have no evidence for the God they'd like to believe in. But then they dishonestly pretend that, since there's no evidence either that God exists or that God doesn't exist, that either belief is reasonable. But let's take a closer look at that claim. The first part is true. There's no evidence whatsoever that any God exists. The second part's a bit trickier. Yes, there is no evidence that any particular God doesn't exist, but this doesn't say anything about the existence of any God. Calling attention to the impossibility of proving a God's non-existence is dishonest, because evidence of non-existence is an invalid concept. Think about it. What's your evidence that Smurfette doesn't exist? What's your evidence that Spider-Man doesn't exist? What's your evidence that fairies don't exist? The list of entities that are logically possible but non-existent is endless. Saying that there's no evidence either way is just a dishonest way of pretending that there are three categories of things. Things for which there is evidence of existence, things for which there is evidence of non-existence, and things for which there is no evidence either way. However, this is simply untrue. Because evidence of non-existence is an invalid concept, there's only two categories of things. Things for which there is evidence of existence, and things for which there is no evidence of existence. And gods fall, you guessed it, in the no evidence pile, with the fairies, the superheroes, and Smurfs. Believing in something is not justified if there's no evidence either way. Belief is only justified if there is evidence that the thing in question does exist. Anything else, and you're just playing make-believe. People who use this dishonest tactic do so because they have no evidence for something, but they'd like to believe in it anyway, so they pretend that their belief is justified because the thing's non-existence hasn't been proven. But people who are interested in the truth have no need for such deceptive nonsense. Louis Pasteur did not challenge others to prove that germs didn't cause disease. He demonstrated that they did. Henri Becquerel never asked anyone to prove that radiation didn't exist. He simply demonstrated that it did. And even today, when ignorant and dishonest creationists say that there's no such thing as a transitional form, Aaron Ra doesn't challenge them to prove that transitional forms don't exist. He simply demonstrates that they do. None of these people have any need for the dishonest tactic of considering the evidence for non-existence, and none of them need to use the equally dishonest tactic of saying that there's no evidence either way. That's because the things they believe in are demonstrably real, and there's no need for deception of any kind. But the God Christians want to believe in is not demonstrably real. Christians thus use this tactic because they can't demonstrate that their God exists, because there's no reason to believe that this God exists, but they desperately want to believe in it anyway. For those of you who insist on using this line, ask yourselves honestly, do you apply this kind of reasoning across the board? Do you believe in fairies? There's no evidence either way about them. Or how about Smurfs? No evidence either way about them either. And is it that you don't see the double standard that you're using? Or is it that you don't care how much you lie to yourself or to others, so long as you get to believe in whatever unsubstantiated nonsense makes you happy?